So we have a listener that has a question, and this is something that I think a lot of us struggle with, where you've got one person that's really good at organizing, and then you have somebody in the relationship like you and me who's creative and that has clutter.
Yeah.
And so let's play this question because I'd love to hear your advice on how you deal with that kind of relationship conflict.
Hi, Mel. It's Therese. What do you do if your spouse is a sloppy person, but you're not? I feel like I am constantly trying to organize our house and keep it clean, but my husband has such a difficult time keeping it that way. I am constantly picking up after him. Anyone that comes over knows my side of the room versus his side. We are childless by choice, but sometimes I feel like I have a house full of them. Help. Thank you.
Dana,
Yes.
please help us because I am her husband.
Right. And I think that's where I come into this scenario is I always say, just so you know, I'm speaking from the perspective of her husband. There is not a way to change other people, right? Like and nobody likes to be changed,
Yep.
especially in a relationship. I mean, it just, right? Like it often makes you hold on tighter to your stuff when you're just criticizing or whatever. So I'm not saying that that's what she's doing at all, but here are the things to remember that we've talked about. Clutter threshold. Okay. Your husband has a different clutter threshold than you do. In common spaces, declutter down to the lowest common clutter threshold. Now, I am not a math person, but I do sort of remember what lowest common denominators were, right? And so it's like you just go down more and more and more until you hit that lowest common clutter threshold in shared spaces. That doesn't mean you can't have elaborate systems in your spaces that are like yours to be in charge of, or, we all have different spaces within our home, but in those common spaces, it is likely never going to be satisfactory for you if you just create an elaborate system that would work for you and then try to push him into that system. Instead, remember the value of decluttering. If something does not exist in your home, it cannot end up all over the place, right? Okay. Now, along with that, I'm not saying get rid of his stuff so that it can't get out of control. That's not what I'm saying at all. All right. But when we go back to the container concept, as far as like things that are his, give him a space. Okay. And I don't mean like this is your space, but I mean honor the fact that he has things that he's into that are different from yours. You have things that you're into as well, and say, okay, I am going to clear out this closet or this shelf or whatever space we have available. I'm going to clear this out and say, hey, this is for you. This is what I did for my husband, who also, I mean, I'm very thankful that he's not super neat because he's way neater than me, So he's always been very, very patient with all of my issues, But what I did was I cleaned out something where I had thought I needed to have a place for, I think it's where I kept my kids out of season clothes. And I said, no, I'm going to clear that out. I'm going to empty it out. And I'm going to say, hey, this is your space for all of your 1980s memorabilia collectibles that you have, collected over the years, because he loves that kind of stuff. But he didn't really do anything with it. And so it was just kind of there and it would just get shifted all around. So I'm like, this is the space for this. And he was like, oh, wow. Okay. I mean, because I was saying I'm not going to have this argument over why do you have that stuff like that. The word why will shut people down immediately. Right. So instead say, okay, this is the place that I have created for you. So yeah, put your favorite things in there first. And then, whatever doesn't fit, we'll get rid of that. But that worked so well. And it's so funny because my husband has come on my podcast, like whenever I hit 100 episodes. And so on the 100th episode, it was his first time on there, and somebody had asked a question for him. And, how does Dana help you declutter? And he was like, well, she cleared out this thing and then she told me, hey, put your favorite, memorabilia stuff in there first. And then and then she was like, whatever doesn't fit, get rid of that. And he was like, and that just made it really easy for me to, determine what I loved and what I didn't love as much. And I said, oh yeah, the container concept. And he was like, what? Like, you don't have to explain the container concept to them. Give them a space and say, hey, this is your space. And then the key there is to not judge what they put in it. Like, let them just put their favorite things in first. And there is no criticism over that. And this happens a lot with kids, right? Like, you say, okay, put your favorite stuffed animals in here first. And then they don't keep the one that you spent a lot of money on and that, you thought was going to be highly sentimental. And instead they keep the one that the neighbor gave them that they won at Six Flags. And, it's leaking little white, pebbles or whatever. They get to put in their container, whatever, because you can keep anything, but you can't keep everything. And then you let the container be the bad guy. So it's like,
just so I'm clear. So, because I really relate to this question. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason why I relate to this question is Chris's clutter threshold is way lower than mine.
Yeah.
And the truth is, he is always picking up after me. My coat is always on the back of the chair. And
can I clarify something?
Yes.
Clutter threshold is the amount of stuff that you can handle. So
he can handle
it's possible his
less.
clutter threshold is higher than yours.
Oh, that's what I meant. Higher.
Yes.
Higher.
Okay.
I meant lower, meaning
yes.
He's got to have less stuff around. So his clutter threshold is higher than mine. And if he sees something out of place, he is immediately drawn to go put it in its place. Mm-hmm. And like you, I'm the kind of person that I blow my nose with the Kleenex. I'm on my way to the trash can. Something distracts me. I put the Kleenex on the counter.
Yeah.
And we have endless, not fights, but it's frustrating for him because he has often said, it makes me feel like you think I'm your maid. And I'm like, no, I just don't care about hanging my coat up right now.
Yeah.
And I'll get to it later. How do you handle this conflict between an organized person and somebody who has a lower threshold?
I do want to be clear that I'm not a mental health professional. I always try to make that clear, right? Okay. So it's not easy. And this is literally the number one question. Okay. But I am going to talk to you as the person asking me this question. All right. Because you are the only person that you can control, right? So we can't control him in this situation, but you are asking because it does, it's a frustration in this. What I'll say on that is the 5-minute pickup is the answer to your tendency to randomly put things down. Okay.
What is the 5-minute pickup?
So the 5-minute pickup is a daily or mostly daily habit, routine, whatever you want to call it, the reason I don't call it habits necessarily is that I thought habits were going to be magical. And that if I could just get this down someday, I would be like doing my dishes and picking things up. And I didn't even realize I did my dishes, like that's not how it works. I still have to talk myself through it, but it's a routine. And so I'm going to set the timer for 5 actual minutes, not trying to trick myself into working for longer, but I'm going to set the timer for 5 minutes at whatever point in the day where it crosses my mind that, oh, wait, there's stuff all over. I'm going to set the timer for 5 minutes. I'm going to pick stuff up and put it all the way away for 5 minutes. And that is the thing that will help me to deal with the Kleenexes that are there, deal with the coat that is here. Those things get put away. So it's like how I combat my natural tendency and keep my house under control. But the other thing that happens is the more often that I do that, the more likely it is. It's never guaranteed. And it depends on how much I have going on in my brain at the time. But the more often I do that, the more likely I am to start to put something down and then realize, oh, every single day I have to come and pick up this thing from this spot. And so I'm much more likely to put it away. Okay. So that's my answer to you in this scenario. My answer to him, if he was asking me this question,
yes,
the first thing I would do is tell a little story about my husband. And we do this thing where like on our anniversary, we'll kind of like, write in a journal. And in the beginning, it was like all these things we've learned about each other and it was so easy. And now we're like trying to come up with stuff, it's been 23 years, but One of the things he said, probably 2 to 3 years into this deslobification process, that I was going through, is he was like, he goes, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but I've realized that it's like there actually is something wrong with you. And I was so happy that he said that to me, because what he was saying was, because he went on to say, I've realized you don't do this on purpose.
Yes.
This is not, you are not refusing to close the cabinet doors.
Yes.
You just literally don't notice whether they're open or closed. You are not putting something down thinking, oh, he will get rid of that later. You don't realize it. And so he was very nice and sweet about it, but he said, I've realized this is how your brain works. And I was like, thank you. Exactly. And he realized that as I was working on ways to combat how my brain works naturally. Right. So it wasn't just every time I say, accept how I am not saying, oh, well, my house is a disaster. Instead, it's accept how I am so that I can actually do things in a way that work for me so that my house is manageable. It's still not perfect, never going to be color coded, but it's manageable.
Amazing.
Right? Like I can handle it. And so anyway, that's the thing I would say there, but also to realize that it comes down to that clutter threshold. And remember, you're probably not going to help the other person do better in these types of things by organizing. You're going to help them by decluttering, even some of your own like stuff in that common area where we both use this space. It's better for us to have less stuff in here so that there's less stuff to get out of control.
So do you recommend that a couple do that together to start in the common space so that you both learn the process?
Not to start. I recommend that whoever is listening to me, I always say, I'm like, you're the one listening to this lady on the internet who has referred to herself as a slob. I mean, I'm like, you're the one who cares enough to be, listening to this podcast right now or whatever. And so you go ahead and deal with your own stuff. Like, don't start with the other person's stuff. That is a recipe for disaster. And yet their stuff is more obviously clutter, right? But start with your own stuff first and neutral stuff in visible spaces. And I can't guarantee it, except that it happened to me and it happens to so many people who contact me. As you do that and your family starts to see, oh, okay, you're getting rid of stuff that I never thought you would get rid of, or, oh, it's so much easier to live in our house with less stuff. Then other people start to get on board. Their view of stuff and clutter starts to change. So the first thing to do is for you to worry about your own stuff before you try to get anyone else on board.
For anybody listening that's going to go straight to a visible space and start this process, can you just let them know a little bit about the emotional aspect of trying to let go of stuff and going through the process of decluttering?
Yeah. So my 5-step process specifically, purposefully does not use emotions to declutter, but it's because I was so emotionally attached to my stuff, either because it represented who I thought I was going to be someday or who I had been in the past, or, just sentimental things that people had given me that they gave me because they were like, oh, Dana will treasure this. And I'm like, oh, do I have to change who I am? So the process doesn't use any of that, but it allows for it. Okay. So I am not going to ask you to be heartless. I'm not going to ask you to change how you feel about things, but start with the trash. Okay. Because the beauty of that is as you start with these things and you make visible progress before you've ever even dealt with anything that has emotion attached to it, is you see the progress that you're making and you realize, oh, wow, open space, less stuff changes my house. It changes how this space looks. And then by the time you get to more emotional stuff, it looks different to you, right?
Oh, that's
or
great.
You have created the space to be able to keep that item. Where when we're like, that's going to be emotional, and so I'm not going to do anything because I can't deal with those emotions, then that stuff just sits there and it's sitting with all this other stuff that isn't emotional. And that makes it, never make any progress. And so know that you can make a ton of progress before you ever have to deal with emotional stuff. The other thing too, is this is something you can step away from. So start on those first 3 steps that have 0 emotions. And then if you get to emotional stuff, either skip that item and say, I'm not dealing with that today. I'm going to move to the next thing. Just don't let it stop the process, because as you continue to improve your home, you will either create the room for it or you'll be ready to deal with it.
Phenomenal. You distinguish between routines and to-do lists. Can you explain that?
Sure. So I, as a project person, I would look around my house and think, I'm changing today. Today's the day. This is it, right? And so I would make a list of all the things I needed to do. Well, just looking at that list of all the things I needed to do was completely exhausting, right? So the way I actually started to change my home was by just focusing on what I had always thought of as maintenance tasks. And it didn't make sense for me to do maintenance things when my house was a disaster. I was like, no, I need to get my house perfect. Then it will make sense to maintain. But instead I was like, well, that's not working. But I do know that other people don't have to spend hours in their kitchen getting the kitchen clean when it's time to clean the house. And I do. And so I'm going to so I started on these very basic things. And so I started with doing the dishes. I was like, I don't know how other people don't seem to have dirty dishes piled on their counter at all times, but they don't. And so I am going to focus on this. And so I started working on the dishes. I started working on, just focused in on that, and would take about 7 days is what I found to be like, okay, now I get it. Now it's starting to feel natural. And then I would move on to another thing. And so I was adding daily habits, and that is what changed my house. That plus decluttering, not organizing, not decorating, not anything, but daily stuff plus decluttering gave me the house that I'd always wanted. So I boiled it down to 2 very basic habits. Okay. Really, there are 4 that I talk about in How to Manage Your Home Without Losing Your Mind. But if you can't do those, you just do these 2. And if you can't do both, you just do 1. And the first one is do the dishes. So it's like, even when I start to feel completely overwhelmed and I'm like, do the dishes. Like I hear from people all the time. Like I hear your voice all the time saying, just do the dishes. That gives me something to do to get started. Then the next thing is the 5-minute pickup. Okay. Yep. If I will do that, even if my house is a disaster right now, I'm not going to get it perfect first and then start doing 5-minute pickups. I'm just going to do a 5-minute pickup every day at the least. Right. And then declutter with any time that I have.
Great. What's the third routine?
Yes. Checking the bathrooms for clutter. Is another one. I'm not even talking about like cleaning it. I'm not talking about cleaning it. I'm just talking about checking it for clutter. Make sure that, when it's time to clean it, all I have to do is clean it. It's not like covered, like you were talking about your bathroom counter, stuff like that. And then the other one is sweep the kitchen floor. It's not so much about the crumbs. It's more about an action that helps me see what has been scattered on the floor. Like the groceries where I took the frozen stuff and the refrigerated stuff out, and then I left the other stuff on the floor and it's been there for a couple of days, or whatever. So it's a routine that helps me keep my house under. If I will do those 4 things, my house looks fine. It's not perfect, but it looks fine if I will do those. And so what I found was I wanted to boil it down so far that I didn't need a list. So I don't have to say, oh, wow, my house is overwhelming. I need to make a new plan. Instead, I just say, my house is overwhelming. I'm going to do the dishes. Doing the dishes significantly improves my home.
Wow.
Okay.
I love this. I love this because I can do this. This is awesome. I got to start with a confessional because I booked the expert that you're about to meet today because I need to talk to her. I struggle with this profoundly. I am talking about organization in your home. You may be the person that is super slobby, or you might be the one that is like almost OCD. This is a conversation for all of us. My guest today says you and we got this topic of organizing completely wrong.